All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to have a bit of an informal lecture since we'll be going over a review of everything that we learned about React. We're going to do this review through the Rick and Morty API and the Rick and Morty exercise that we've been working over in the last couple of days. All right. Now, just as a friendly reminder, if you have any questions, please post them on the Zulu questions. If you do not put them in the Zulu questions, you can put them in the Zoom chat. The chances of me reading them from the Zoom chat are going to be a lot less than seeing them from the Zulu questions. So please, if you could help me out and paste your questions on Zulu questions, that would be great. With that said, if at any point throughout this demonstration, anybody has any questions or you need me to stop, slow down, or there's any sort of adjustment that you want me to explain, please ensure to interrupt the lecture. Don't wait until a natural pausing point, because if you wait until a natural pausing point, it may be 10 or 15 steps way further than where the question was happening. So just stop me right there and then so that we can cover any information that you may need. And then afterwards, we'll continue moving forward. All right. So let's go ahead and start with our first exercise of the Rick and Morty exercise. I went ahead and shared the link to the exercise on our Zulu questions channel. Gonna pull it up here as well. Now, in this exercise, we are to create a Vite and React project that is going to have a homepage, app.jsx, a router. We'll be creating a browser router, a short attention getter. We're probably going to skip this attention getter portion just for efficiency's sake, and have it rendering the homepage at the app within our browser router. So let's start getting that into some code. I'm going to go ahead and run npm create Vite. I'm going to do it within my part1 directory. Here it's giving me a couple of options. So I'm going to open it up a little bit more so I can see that I'm choosing React and also choosing JavaScript. From there, I will npm install my dependencies for this project. You can see that part1 now has this project inside of it. I'm installing the dependencies from package.json to create this node modules directory and this package-lock.json file. From there, I'm going to go ahead and fix any vulnerabilities that I may have. So I'm going to run npm audit fix --force as instructed by the commands there up above. Now that I have all my information and my project is ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and install React Router DOM. All right. I'm going to use this terminal here to run my development server. I'm going to open up this development server alongside. There I have Vite. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of this natural CSS that we already have put in to clean up my project a little bit. And I'm going to go into main.jsx and get rid of this React strict mode. That way my console.log statements aren't happening twice. All right. Awesome. Well, now that I have this set up, I can go ahead and create my router. I'm going to change directory into my source directory. Here I'm going to make a file named router.jsx, and I'm going to code set file of router.jsx. Now in this file, I'm going to go ahead and import create browser router. And this is going to be from React router DOM. I'm also going to import app. And now that I'm within the source directory, I'm going to go ahead and make a directory named pages. And in pages, I will make a file named homepage. I'm just going to code here really quickly. This homepage will simply return an h1 element saying homepage. Actually, I'll go ahead and add a fragmentation tag. That way I can go ahead and make a paragraph tag right under it, where I will have a attention getter. Followed by some lorem ipsum. All right, so there's my homepage. I'm going to go ahead and export default this file. Now homepage is being exported. It's a good function. Let me go ahead and dive in back into my router. And in my router, I'm going to import my homepage. From there, I can go ahead and start creating my router of create browser router, which takes in an array of objects. And in this object, I'm going to have a path, which will be of index. The element that will render will be my application. And I will determine that the children that this application is going to render at index. Nope. I'll clean up the syntax here shortly. And the element that I will render will be the home page. All right, so I cleaned it up a little bit. There we go. We have our browser or router, which currently has one specific object. In this object, we're rendering the path of index at localhost 5173. The element that will render will be my app, and the only child inside of it will be the home page, which will display at index equals true. So if I take a look at my drawing here, what I'm currently achieving is I am attempting to build the router. The router has an application inside of it and a URL pattern for its children elements. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and export this router. And now that I have my router, I can go to main.jsx and plug it all in. I'm going to utilize router provider from React Router DOM, where the proper router will be equal to the router that I've created from router.jsx. Get rid of the app there. And finally, I can code or app.jsx. And in app.jsx, I'm just going to simply get rid of all of this text that's rendering here. I'm going to add an h2 element, which will say navbar, because later on I will be adding a navbar. And then I'll go ahead and plug in my outlet. And again, my outlet is from React Router DOM. All right. Let me go ahead and make sure that my site is still rendering. It is. And there we have a navbar for my h2 element, and then the home page that I created being plugged in from the router. And this is going to conclude the first assignment. At this point, does anyone have any questions over what I covered in that first assignment? All right. Let's go ahead and move into our second assignment. Can go ahead and share the URL here in our Zulu questions. And let me see if I can pull it up here as well. I'm going to make a copy of this part 1 exercise, and I'll name it part 2 in this case. I'll CD into part 2 and run my development server. Interesting. It's not going to let me do it that way. So instead, I'm just going to do it through commit history here. And then I'll go over the commit history on the tree on demos and notes so that everybody knows how to find the correct information. All right. So now for part two of our exercise. In part two of our exercise, we're going to go ahead and add a couple more pages. We have an about page, which should render general information about the page. We have a characters page, which should render a card from Bootstrap to be from the Brick and Morty API to a card for each individual character. All right. And let's see, routes for each page mentioned above within browser router. Okay. A not found should also be rendering. An error boundary should also be available. And a nav bar should also be available. All right. So let me go ahead and create a checklist here of what I need, or actually the checklist is quite literally the assignments. So rather than doing that, let's move into installing some React Bootstrap. Here we have our command. I'm going to install React Bootstrap. While it's installing, I'm going to find this import CSS statement, which I need to ensure that happens in router, or excuse me, in main.jsx. All right. That's going to give me some Bootstrap components. I can see that my text has just changed, and that's because Bootstrap has now been installed. Now I can go into components and find cards. And here's a card that I'll utilize for every character. So I'm going to go ahead and change directory into my source directory and make a directory named components. Here inside of components, I'll make a file named character card.jsx. For character card, I'm just going to go ahead and paste that basic example. Don't want to do anything too crazy yet because I want to make sure I have the correct props and information. So there's my character card. The component that I needed has been created. I'm going to go into pages, and in pages, I'm going to create an about page. And I'm going to create a characters page. I'm going to go ahead and open up the about page. Which will return an H1 element saying about page. I'm going to go ahead and export default about page. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and code into my characters page. And actually, this characters page may be a little bit more redundant as far as functionality goes. So I'm just going to make the template, connect it into my router, and then afterwards I'll dive into this characters page and its functionality. All right. So there's all of our code as far as our pages go. That has all been created. I can start closing them down because I'm not going to need all of this information. I only want what I need open for now. I'm going to go over to my router. Here I'm going to go ahead and add another child element. This child will have the path of about. Then we'll render the element of about page. All right, wasn't able to import it on its own. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and make the characters. Then we'll render the element of characters. I'm going to go ahead and import about page. I'm going to import the characters page. All right, let's make sure everything is rendering still. Everything is rendering. Now I'm going to need a nav bar. Rather than creating one on my own, I'm going to go ahead and do that within my components. And I'm going to create a navbar.jsx. Steal one from React Bootstrap as soon as I can find one. There you go. Navbar. I'm just going to take the very first one and utilize that. All right, so there's our nav bar being created. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this nav dropdown because I really don't want it. And I know that I want to be able to manipulate which or the URL pattern at which I'm going to visit without triggering a re-render. So I'm going to need link from React Router DOM. All right. And then I'm going to go ahead and make this Rick and Morty, which will send me home. I'm not going to need a home link, but I could leave an about. And I could leave a characters. Now for all of these, I'm going to make an as attribute that will utilize link from React Router DOM and add a to attribute in there. I don't need hrefs. I can get rid of those. And I can just say about and characters. All right, that should take care of my nav bar. I can now just utilize that nav bar inside of app.jsx by bringing in my nav bar, which I did not import. So I'm going to go ahead and import nav bar. Let's go over to Vite. There I have my Brick and Morty nav bar. When I click on the Brick and Morty, it sends me back exactly home. If I click on About, it shows me my About page. And if I click on Characters, it shows me my characters from Rick and Morty page. So all three of my pages have been added. They're connected to my router. The next thing that I'm going to go ahead and add, it's going to be within Pages. And there I need to make a 404 not found. And I need to make an error page. Let's go ahead and make this not found page. And let's return, or excuse me, export default this not found page. All right, finally, let's go into our error page. and return an H1 element saying unexpected error, please contact provider. Not putting too much styling or thought into these not found or error pages because this is not where the meat and potatoes of functionality is happening, and I want to make sure we focus on that throughout the demonstration for today. So let's go into the router. In the router, I'm going to go ahead and add my not found page and specify that the element that we will be responding to with will be not found. All right. And then finally, we need an error boundary, which will take in our error page. Let's go ahead and import both of these. All right. And now everything has been connected. If I go over to a URL pattern that does not match, I get my 404, this page doesn't exist, and I can still go back home and manipulate my navbar. All right, I've covered quite a bit of information up to this point. Before I start going into the actual functionality of the characters page, does anyone have any questions regarding the router? Okay, if there are no questions regarding the router, let's go ahead and continue on by diving into the characters page functionality. Now, in my characters page, what I want to do is I want to create a request that will grab all of the characters from the Rick and Morty API or a number of characters from the Rick and Morty API, iterate through them, and render a card for each one of those characters. So with that said, I'm going to need a couple of state values. The first one is going to be characters. And I know that this is going to ultimately be an array of objects, which is going to come back from the Rick and Morty API. All right, take a look at the Rick and Morty API here. I can take a look at all the characters that are available. So here it gives me an example. I'll go ahead and actually grab this here and send that request. Okay, so I see that I have this info, I have this previous, and then in results, I have an array of objects. All right, so there's a total of 42 pages. That's from what I can see here in the documentation as well. And for every single one of those pages inside of info, I'm getting a next or a previous value. So I can add that as well. I'm going to say next URL, set next URL, which is going to be null. And then I can do the same thing, but instead of doing it for next, I can do it for previous. I'm just going to start both of those off as null for now. All right. So let me go ahead and kick this portion off. I know I'm going to need Axios here, so I can go ahead and install that dependency. Now within my file, I can import Axios from Axios. I'm going to make my function of get characters, which is going to be an asynchronous function. In this function, I'm going to go ahead and try to let info and results actually not sure that's exactly how that's going to look, so I'm going to grab data instead, and data is going to come back from Axios dot get. I'm going to take this URL up above. All right, so that get function is going to be sent. I am then going to have data. I can then grab both info and results from data, and I can set my next URL to info.next, set my previous URL to info.previous, and I can set my characters to results. All right. I can then catch my error and just alert the error if there is one.
Where are you getting the .next or .previous?
Did you say that one more time?
In line 13 and 14, where are you getting the .next and .previous?
Yeah, so here inside of my response, there's an info portion, which I'm grabbing from line 12. Inside of info, there is a next, which gives me the next page, and then a previous, which gives me a previous page if there is one.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. All right.
For line 12, you're deconstructing both info and results. What are you accomplishing doing that?
It's just syntax. I could just do something like this where I can grab it straight from the data.info.result, or and so on. But just so that I don't have to write data dot everything else, I'm just first grabbing the data straight from the response, and then I'm grabbing info and results straight from the data. That way I have those attributes directly available to me.
So you're taking info and results from the data object, not you're not assigning info and data both to the entirety of data.
Right. So data
Okay.
comes back with both info and results, and then I'm grabbing each one of those separately.
Okay.
Does a computer just know how to do that?
It's object destructuring because they're coming back in an object. So by doing this, I'm just destructuring the object and grabbing those independent values.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. All right.
If you wanted to add like a status check on this, how would you do it with this API that doesn't return it by default?
If I wanted to add a status check, it does return a status by default. If I wanted to grab the status, I can also grab it this way. And then I can say if status is equal to 200, then I would do the following. Is that along the lines you were asking, Tim?
It does. My question is, in the API example on the right, it doesn't show a status anywhere. Is that just a hidden value that's always there?
Got it. So the example that we're seeing here is going to be what's inside of data. It's not going to show me my HTTP headers
Hmm.
inside. So HTTP headers will have data and status every single time.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. So now let's go ahead and add a couple of use effects so we can see these values here. Or actually, we'll just go ahead and add one. I'm going to go ahead and do use effect. And instead of just passing in this characters, I'm just going to pass in a URL. I'm going to say request URL. That way I could continue utilizing this same exact function. All right, so there's my use effect. This use effect is going to console.log the values of characters, the value of next URL, the value of previous URL, and it's going to do that anytime any of those change. So I'm going to go ahead and add characters, previous URL, and next URL. Finally, I need this function to actually get called. So I'm going to add a separate use effect, which will handle the calling of this function. Of get characters with the initial call to that URL pattern. All right, and let's add two buttons here. So I'm going to say, hey, if, add a little bit of a fragmentation tag there. I'm going to say, if previous URL exists, I want you to render a button, which I totally misspelled. It says previous. Otherwise, I don't want you to render anything. I'm going to do the same thing for next URL. So if new next URL exists, then I want you to render, again, a button that says next. Otherwise, I don't want you to do anything. So there's my two buttons that have been created. Let's go ahead and take a look at Vite here. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading next. Okay, that's fine. We'll go ahead and dive into that here shortly.
Quick question.
Yep,
So doesn't use effect without a dependency trigger on every render?
that's correct. Yes. So as soon as the
So wouldn't it,
component
so
mounts, I would
wouldn't
send them.
even when you have a different URL, it'd be calling the same character URL?
No. And we're going to be covering that here shortly. I haven't gotten
Okay.
to the part where it's going to be going to the different pages.
Okay.
All right, let me go ahead and inspect this. Let me check my console. Refresh it. All right, so there we have the original values, an empty array and two nulls. Then we get an array of 20 objects with a next attribute and a null for previous attribute. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually call my function here of get characters. So I'm going to say on click, I want to get characters. And now for previous, I'll go ahead and utilize previous URL. And for next, I'll utilize next URL. So now when I click, I'm going to refresh it. There's our URL here. We can see that next is for page 2. If I click on next, now next becomes page 3. Previous becomes page 1. If I go back to previous, well, now there's no previous, so it goes back to null. And now I have a pagination where I can iterate through all of the different pages of characters and get 20 characters at a time. So now I have my way to iterate through these different characters there. Let's go ahead and actually see it. And actually, before I move on, did that answer your question, Jason?
I mean, kind of not really, because I'm still confused. Because aren't you, every time you press next, aren't you re-rendering?
I am not actually re-rendering the entire application. I'm triggering a state render, which is happening from
Oh,
the
okay,
virtual
okay.
DOM.
All right, that makes sense then. Thank you.
Francesco, I do have one question.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Um, so is there any drawback from just grabbing the entire list in bulk, like just paginating everything, just throwing everything into like a characters array? And or just is it better to just paginate like you're doing it now?
Yeah, so usually if an API is giving you the ability to do something like this, it more than likely the API is taking its server into consideration. It's
Gotcha.
grabbing only a specific certain of data, a specific certain amount of data at a time to make sure that requests are staying light. So it would be the right thing for the front end developer to ensure that they are doing their part to maintain the request light. And that's all this is doing. It's making our ability to maintain our request light. All we're doing is sending 20 objects at a time rather than asking for 800 and something objects to come back straight from a database. Does that answer your question, Max?
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Now let's go ahead and start getting some character cards. Let's start looking at some characters. Well, I'm going to go ahead and map through my characters division there. So I'm going to say 4 characters I want to map, where for every character, I want to go ahead and render a character card, which I'm going to have to import from up above. All right, so there's some character cards now rendering. I should be getting a warning saying that I need to pass a key to each child. So I'm going to go ahead and check my documentation here. It looks like every character has an ID. So I'm just going to give the key attribute of character.id. That should get rid of that warning. Now to take a look at the character. So here for this image source, I'm just going to go ahead and grab from character dot, and if I take a look there, it looks like we have a image URL, I believe. Here we have an image. So character.image will send us to the image of the specific URL there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab character.image. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass in, because I know I'm going to need the prop of character. For the card title, I'm just going to utilize the name of this character. And that will just be character.name. I can see that that is the independent status there. For some quick facts, I'm just going to put status in species. Let's just do status. All right. Now I can go over to my character page and I can pass in the prop of character to match in the character that's being passed in through the map. Let me go ahead and erase it. We refresh our page there. I'm going to add a little bit of CSS just to make sure that this all stays nice and pretty. I'm going to do it inline. Ideally, I would put it inside of classes and all of that, but to save some time, I'm just going to do it this way. Actually, I should do that. All right, that makes it a little bit more dynamic there. We see we have all of our characters showing up. I can scroll all the way to the bottom. There we can see the next. When I click on next, sends me to the next portion there. And I can probably switch this to be up top as well. Click on next and speed to the next portion. Now I have new characters from that next page and so on. All right. And now we have the functionality for getting all of our characters for independent character pages or independent character cards. And that's going to conclude exercise number 2 for the Rick and Morty exercise. Does anyone have any questions over part 2 of the Rick and Morty exercise? There's got to be something.
What if you were like, I guess this is more like CSS related or like Bootstrap, but like you did it where you have a scroll, you have like an element, you can scroll through the element. That way you don't have to scroll down all the page.
Yeah, I could definitely do that as well. Let me go ahead. Where is this div here? Flex wrap. Let me give it a height. I'm just gonna do max height. That's how that works. And let's do it of 30 vmin. And let's say overflow hidden, or actually scroll. Ooh, 30 vmin is not cutting the cheese. And this should be overflow Y. Let's go with 50. Yep. And there you go. You have your scrollable element that you can scroll instead of scrolling all the way across up and down the page, just like you mentioned. Maybe 30 or 50 vmin isn't counting the cheese either. Let's go with 70. There you go. Does that address your question, Chase? All right, I see the thumbs
Yeah,
up.
thanks.
Of course. All right. Perfect. Well, so far we've covered 2 of our exercises. There is 2 remaining. I'm checking here on the Zulu questions. I have nothing. I'm going to check the Zoom chat. All right. Looks like everything is good on the Zoom chat as well. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back and continue on with our lecture at 9:57 for part 3. Thank you so much, everyone. And let me go ahead and pause the recording. All right, welcome back, everyone. That's going to be, currently we just finished part 2 of the Rick and Morty exercise. Now in part 3, let's take a look at what we have here. So in part 3, we're going to take a look at a character's details page, which should display all information pertaining to a single character. Ensure to utilize use parameters, a dynamic route that will display character detail page JSX. Okay, great. And implement a functionality for use navigate through your program. All right, perfect. So it looks like we essentially are just adding one more page, which is going to be the characters page. Here I'm going to go ahead and change directory into part 1 and go into sources. In sources, I'm going to go into pages. And inside of pages, I'm going to create a new page here. I'm going to say characters or character detail page. Now inside of this character detail page, I'm actually going to grab something straight from Bootstrap. I'm going to grab it from the cards component. And I believe I saw it yesterday where they have kind of a huge panel for an image with a little bit of text block right under it. Nope, close. Here it is. All right, looks like that we have 2 of them. Perfect. Gonna go ahead and grab this, bring it here. And I'm going to utilize the card where the text is after the image. All right. And here I'm going to go ahead and call this the character detail page. All right. Now, I need to wait for this page to render. It's going to be from the router. And I'm going to take a look at the documentation because now I'm thinking about fetching information about one specific character. So I can take a look at get a single character, and it looks like the only thing I'm going to need is going to be the ID. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I already know I'm going to need a use parameter there. I'm going to come over to my router. In my router, I'm going to add a path for characters slash character ID. And this is going to render the element of character detail page. There seems to be an error here, and that's because I'm missing a comma. And there you go. All right, so now my router has been built, and now I have a char ID parameter. Now, in my character detail page, I want to actually grab this char ID from use params. So I'm going to say const char ID is equal to use params. And now I can make my request. And set character. This use state is going to be utilized to store the value. I'm going to make it null. And then I'm going to make my function. So get character details. Again, this function is going to be an asynchronous function. And what it's going to do is it's going to utilize Axios to make a request. Place it within a try block. And say let data be equal to axios.get. I'm going to pass in the URL pattern that I see here. I'm going to do that with an interpolated string because I want to utilize that character ID to finish off my request. Now, once data comes back, I will set character to data. I can also utilize my catch block, which will catch the error and just alert the error. Also forgot I need the await key there. All right, and now I just want this element to mount or to run the function upon mounting. So I'm going to utilize this use effect, which will call get character details. And I actually don't feel necessarily comfortable using this per se. Oh, that should work. That should work. All right, let's go ahead and run it this way, and then we'll see if we need to change this information for now. Here I'm going to go ahead and utilize character dot image. And I know that this needs to be within a ternary statement because currently our character is set to null. So if I try to access an attribute of null immediately, it's going to tell me, or it's going to throw an error saying null has no attribute for this information. And for now, I'm just going to do it this way. Actually, let's get a little fancy here. Let's add a spinner. There you go, spinners. Let's just take this first one here. All right, so there's that spinner from React Bootstrap, and I could just grab that code there. All right, now let's take a look at what this. Oh, I haven't connected the URL just yet. But before we go into doing that, let's go ahead and just do /1. That should give me Rick. All right, so we saw that spinner there for a split second. Then we get our information, and we see Rick coming back. All right, awesome. That worked out the way we wanted it to. Now, if I go ahead and change this to something like 5, and I send the request, again, we saw that spinner, and then we get good old Jared or Jerry showing up there. All right, now let's go into our router. Oh, excuse me, not our router. Let's go into our characters page. Because in our characters page, inside of this character card, there's a button that we can utilize to go over to this site. So let's go ahead and create a function that would do this. Let's say const handle navigate. Or let's do this called validate request. This will be an async function. And what it's going to do is it's going to send a request to the appropriate URL. So let me go ahead and grab that URL one more time from the documentation. I'm going to say let status be equal to await axios.get. Again, I'll utilize interpolated string because instead of just that, I'm going to utilize the character ID. I'll say if status is equal to 200, then I am going to use navigate from React Router DOM to navigate over to characters at character.id. Else, I'm going to alert this URL is no longer valid for this character. All right. I'm going to change this button to see details and add the onClick function of validate request. Now let's take a look at our V application. We're going to go ahead and go back to our home. Our home's still working. We can go over to our about page. Our about page is still rendering. Take a look at our characters. And now let's go see details regarding summer. Well, when I click on see details, it sends me over to characters/3. And I can see summer is rendering. Now I can add some of her details along the characters page. Or excuse me, the character detail page. So in the character detail page, instead of just seeing some text there, we're going to go ahead and add a UL.
So maybe I missed it. Where's it pulling the character ID from initially?
So here we have our characters page. In this characters page, we'll make a request for all of the characters, which should be 20 objects. Inside of those 20 objects, in each one of them, there is a character.id attribute or an ID attribute inside of each object. We pass this object as a prop into the character card. And inside of the character card, we destructure the props to grab that character variable. And that's
Oh,
what
I see.
creates
I
that
see.
character.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Of course. A little bit of nesting in there. All right. And let me take a look at our documentation here to see what we want to display. So for this card text, maybe we do something like, all right, let's do an li here where the name will be set to character.name. Nope, did not mean to do that. A little bit of keyboard discipline there. We can also add the species or the status for character.status. We can add the species for character.species. Oh, let's see what else we got here. We can even put the gender apparently, so why not? Let's do that. Not sure why that's annotated in the API, but I'll take it. Let's see. What else do we have here? We even have it created, so why not utilize it if it's there? Actually, that's more for the API. This is when it was created within the database. It's not really something that we need. So let's not.
You could put where they live, like the location.
Oh, yeah, why not? Let's do that. Let's do location and do character dot location dot name. Hopefully all of them have a location. If they don't, we'll have to put in a ternary statement. But for now, this works. Let's go ahead and go into Vite. Take a look at our application. I do not like how that just becomes bigger. Let's see. There's got to be some sort of limitation that I can give that card there. Card battery. Okay. So here's the card. BS prefix, background text, border, body, Boolean false. Okay. Card image. There you go. Variant top, bottom. Let me go ahead and do this here. Let me add a style. That inline styling might get overwritten by that CSS, but that is okay. Well, let's try it out and see how it works. And this is a height. Let's just give it a 30 view height. There you go. Much better. That would stay in there. Oh, that's not necessarily. That's a little better. All right. Awesome. So now we can go ahead and take a look at other characters. We go through our score level division there. We can see Educator Rick. And this alien as well. All right. So that accomplished our assignment for part 3. We created a character details page. We have a dynamic route for it, which takes in a parameter. And we implemented a functionality for use navigate as well. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions regarding part 3 of the assignment?
Can you go back over the use navigate section, please?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and go over to the character part. All right, for the use navigate section, we go ahead and utilize the React hook, or excuse me, the React router DOM hook of use navigate, and we save it into this navigate variable. This is just the class. We're creating an instance of the class and saving it under the navigate variable. Here, I am validating that the request will be successful by ensuring that I'm receiving a status of 200 for this request. Once I can ensure that the request will be executed successfully before I redirect the user, I get that confirmation that I'm getting a status 200 from the server. Then I navigate the user to the URL matching my router. So you can see here in my router, I have this characters char ID. Well, that's what I'm using inside of navigate.
Okay. And where'd you link the navigate to when the button's being clicked? Is it to the validate request function?
Yeah, so this is the validate request function. And here on this button, I have an on click that sends it to validate request.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Perfect. If there aren't any other questions, let me go ahead and move into our last portion of the Rick and Morty exercise. I'm going to share it here on our Zulu questions channel. And I'm also going to paste it here as well. All right, so for part 4 of our Rick and Morty exercise. So we have by the end of this project, you should meet the following. So favorite characters page should display. Okay, so I need to have the ability to add and remove favorite characters. A route to render favorite characters. Users should be able to add or remove characters from their favorites, and they can't have more than 4. All right. Ensure to utilize React Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS for styling. Add a Cypress test suite. I'm probably going to leave this Tailwind CSS and Cypress as a burner because we are running out of time, but we can tackle this favorites page. So let's get into that. Here in Pages, I'm going to go ahead and make a new, get out of the way, mouse. Going to go ahead and make a new file named favorite characters, page.jsx. And I'm going to open said page. And here, I'm going to go ahead and create const favorite characters. And I am going to return, for the time being, a division, or excuse me, a fragmentation tag that will have an h1 header of favorites as soon as I learn how to spell. And then I'll go ahead and add a paragraph tag with a little bit of lorem ipsum, just so we could visualize what is going on inside of this favorites page. And then later on, I'll go ahead and create some iteration process. I'll go ahead and export default this favorite characters page. And now I can go into the router and make the route for this favorite characters. So I'm going to say path of favorites is going to have an element of favorite characters page. All right. So now I have the element or the paths for it. Let's go ahead and go into the nav bar and create a new link for that. Come over to my Veep project, and now I should have a favorites. Great, that shows me a couple of favorites. And now it looks like I need a way to access favorites and share that state across multiple pages. So I'm going to create a state that needs to be shared upon multiple pages. Well, if I take a look at my drawings here, over how I want information to exist and how things are going to be exchanged, or even how information works its way down through the tree, I can see that I'm going to need to utilize an outlet context that I can then share within pages to grab information. All right, so let's do that. Let's me go over to my app JSX, and here I'm going to make a use state for favorites. Now I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of functions here. So I'm going to make a const add two favorites, which is going to take in a character. And from there, I'm going to ask the question of if favorites dot filter and I wanted to return how many of them match the ID of the character that's being passed in. Because if there's a match, it's already inside of favorites. Then I want there to be an OR. And here I'm going to check the length of favorites. If it is greater than 3, then here I'm going to alert to the user. Actually, I'm going to make these separate. Character already in favorites. All right, so that's going to return a value of 1, or actually, that's not going to return a value of 1 or 0. I need to add the dot length attribute. So there you go. That cleans it up a little bit. All right. In this elif statement, I'm going to ask for the length of favorites. If it is greater than 3, then I want to alert the user. You don't have space to add more favorites. And only in the event where neither of those are triggered, I'm going to set favorites to the previous state of favorites plus the new character. All right, so there's those conditions that are being met. Now const remove from favorites. That one is again going to be a character or take in a character as a parameter. And all I'm going to do is filter out the characters. So this one's going to be my easy one. I'm going to set favorites to favorites where I'm going to filter the value of favorites. And I want to only return favorites that don't have a matching ID to the character that is being passed in. All right, so there's my two functions. Add two favorites and remove from favorites. Now
I'm sorry, could you just do line 20 again? I don't know what happened.
yeah, so line 20 is going to set favorites, the use state up here. It's going to grab the current array of favorites and it's going to filter it. It's going to check if any of them match the ID to the character that's being passed in. If it does, it's going to remove it from the array and then set it to the favorites array. All right, I see head nods.
I don't
And
understand that parenthesis after ID. Like like why that's there.
Parenthesis after ID.
Yeah, on both line 10 and line 20. Like directly after char.id, like that parenthesis.
Oh, because we're
It's a
utilizing
function
the
of filter.
filter function. Exactly. Yeah, so the filter function has that yellow bracket. That's where we're
Okay.
calling that function. And then
Okay.
inside of it, we're calling a separate function. And that's what
Okay.
we have the peak.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I just wasn't following that part. Okay.
Awesome.
and I did have a question about that too.
Yeah.
So for line 10, that's basically just returning if any of the IDs match, they'll have like a length of 1. So it'll obviously fail. But if they didn't match, it'd be 0. And it'd go to the next check.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. So finally, our last function here, where we're going to check if it is in fact a favorite character. We're going to pass in character, and we're just going to repeat this line here. All right, so favorites dot linked. So I'm going to say if that is the case, I want to return true. Else, I want to return false. So this evaluates to 1, it will return true. If it evaluates to 0, it will return false. And actually, since I'm already doing this, I could just go ahead and utilize this is favorite inside of here. This might add an extra level of confusion, so I'm not going to do it. But just know that if I were to refactor this, I could just utilize this function inside of line 19. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to nest functions within other functions and add another layer of confusion in here. All right. So now I have my isFavorite function, which will tell me if a character is already within the favorites array. I have the ability to add to favorites, and I have the ability to remove from favorites. Okay, great. Well, now I'm going to start sharing that. I want that to be passed inside of the context. So in my context, I'm going to pass in add to favorites, remove from favorites, isFavorite, and favorites. Now let's take a look at how we're going to utilize these contexts inside of my pages. So in my pages, first in my characters page, here's one place where I have my character card that's being utilized. So I'm going to grab everything from that use outlet context. I'm going to say const isFavorite. I'm going to also grab add to favorites and remove from favorites. All of this is coming from use outlet context.
So pretty much that allows you to grab everything for every page because you're using outlet and use outlet context.
Right. So as long as it's within the children of the app,
Okay.
outlet is what will connect it to it.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. So now I have all of my functions. From there, I can pass them into my card as props. And I can make a prop for every single one of them. I don't necessarily want to do that. So I'm just going to say funcs. And inside of funcs, I'll go ahead and pass in isFavorite, add to favorites, and remove from favorites. All right, now let's take a look at the character card. And in the character card, I want to also grab funks, which is what's being passed in. Now, before I go anything way too far in here, I'm just going to console.log funks. So we can see what that comes in under. Go over to Vite. Let me clear that up there. I'm going to go over to characters. All right, so in funks, what I have is an object with key value pairs to add to favorites, is favorite, and remove favorites. Now inside of my character card, what I can do is I can add another button. I can say funks.isFavorite, where I pass in the character. That will return true or false. If it is true, I want to have a button of variant primary that on click will add, or excuse me, will remove from favorites and pass in the character. This will say remove. And instead of having this, I'm going to pass in warning for the variant. Now, if it evaluates to false, I'm going to have a button of variant primary. And actually, instead of primary, let's do success. That will have an onclick that will grab from funks, add to favorites. And I'll pass in the character. Then I'll do add. Let's take a look at what we just did. So here's all of my characters. I can now add. There's 4 that I have selected. If I add another one, I should get an alert saying you don't have space for this to be a favorite. Now, if I remove one of them, I should now be able to add a new favorite. All right, so my ability to add and remove from the character card has now been created. Everything is working as desired. Does anyone have any questions over how I pass down these functions from the page into the character card as a prompt?
I don't have a question on how you did that. I thought the point of use context was that you didn't have to pass a whole bunch of props to anything that was using those.
Yeah, that's a great point. I could definitely utilize use outlet context within this card here, or this character card, because it's happening within, or it's being utilized within the outlet. It still has access to the outlet. What I don't want is where this card, since it's a component, gets utilized somewhere else where it doesn't have access to the outlet, maybe inside of the app. And then when that happens, it would break this card. Right? So because I don't want it to break the card, I want it to be completely independent. I'm only utilizing the use outlet context within pages. All right, so characters page will utilize the use outlet context to make sure that when character card is being utilized, it receives the appropriate props in order to work properly.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's more of a code isolation or design, I guess. All right. Awesome. So now I have the ability to add and remove from here. Let's go ahead and display these cards inside of our favorite characters page. Well, here, I'm going to grab my favorites. So const favorites, set favorites. Or excuse me, not set favorites. Add two favorites. Remove from favorites. And is favorite. All from use outlet context. All right. Now in here, I'll have a division where I'm going to map through the favorites. And for every favorite, I am going to then render the card. So I'm going to say character card, where the character will be favorite. And funcs will be add to favorites, remove from favorites, and is favorite. And I need to place that there. All right. So here's one. Oh, excuse me. I already have some selected, it looks like. So I still have my 4 selected. Well, now when I go to my favorites page, I see my 4 that I have selected. And from the favorites page, I can remove them. And as I click on remove, they're filtered out of my favorites page. And then I could even add something a little more. I can say, hey, if favorites exist, then render this division. Otherwise, I want you to render a p tag saying you don't have any favorites. It's currently telling me I don't have any favorites. That's great. Gonna come over and go to the characters. And from the characters, I can go ahead and add there's my 4. If I click on the 5th one, it tells me I have too many. I can go to my favorites. And there's my 4. I can remove one from anywhere. Still go back to characters. Add someone else. And now they'll show up in favorites.
Just from a design perspective, is there a reason that you don't have the nav bar as a fixed position at the top of the screen so that you don't have to scroll up to it?
No, that would be a good idea, actually. Let me go ahead and do that real quick. Navbar, let's see. How would I go about doing that portion there? That would probably be here within app.jsx. Let me see what I can do here. I am having a total brain fart. I'm trying to think of 2 things at once. And I'm not looking for display. I'm
Wouldn't
looking.
it be just position fixed, right?
Yes, but the thing about turning it into position fixed is it does that. So give me a second here. All right, so that gives me that information there. And then let's do a top 0. And there you go. And now I can go to characters. If I collapse that, you'll see all the characters are still being rendered. Oh, 5VH did not do the trick. Let's see. There you go. You'll see all the characters are still being rendered. A little bit of bootstrap there that's happening within the Z index. So there's a little bit of the styling that I would need to fix there to be able to get it work properly. But that would be ideally the start. Does that address your question, Tim?
Yeah, it does.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. We were able to do all 4 exercises of the Rick and Morty exercise. So at this point, does anyone have any questions over anything that we covered in today's project or how any of this project works? We're about to dive into our assessment, so if you have any questions, please ask them.
Not about not understanding the components. It's just about practicing putting them together.
As far as Cypress, just pretty much running it as we were taught a few days ago.
Yes, inside of the README, there's gonna be a very detailed portion that's going to explain how to run the test suite and how to get familiarized with the test suite. So we shouldn't run into any issues. Also, this afternoon, before we cut the class, I'll do a demonstration over the test suite so that everybody can see it as well. Okay, perfect. We don't have any questions. I'm gonna go ahead and stop